Hello and welcome to my series about the First Crusade. This is part 2 where we talk about the events directly preceding it. Okay, so last time in the First Crusade series, we left off on that bombshell that even after the Great Schism, the Byzantines, who were Eastern Orthodox Christians, would still turn to the Western Catholic Christians for aid in the wars against the Seljuk Turks, who were Muslim. So Christian solidarity there, everybody. So we also talked about like the 500 or 600 years from the fall of the Western Roman Empire up to the time of the First Crusades, the late 11th century. So Alexius Komnenos, Byzantine emperor, was at near constant war with the Turkic empires, which had set up shop in Anatolia and the Middle East by the late 11th century. He had appealed for aid from the Western Christian powers in March 1095, and I've talked about the Battle of Manzikert the last time and stuff like that, where they had basically lost all of Anatolia by this point, the Byzantines. But he appealed for aid from the Pope. He sent a letter to Pope Urban II in March 1095, and on the 27th of November of the same year, Pope Urban II called a crusade into the Holy Land in a speech at Clermont, which I have done a reading of a couple of months ago now, maybe May, something like that. I'll link this in the description because it's interesting. But he frames it as kind of liberating the Christians from the Muslim menace kind of thing, rather than what it was, which was a call to aid from the Byzantines to recapture Antioch, basically. And in this Nicaea and Antioch, basically, but it wasn't a crusade into like, let's go and capture Jerusalem. This was kind of fabricated later on, as in not later on in history, just later on in the events when the Crusaders got it into their head that that's what they should be doing. But the fact that the original call for aid from the Byzantines was to help in the recapture of Antioch from the Seljuks didn't seem to factor into the propagandistic speech. He frames it more as a crusade into the Holy Land, to take back the Holy Land from Muslim control, which I think is probably the genesis of some of the conflicts which occurred later on in this crusade, which we'll get to in future videos. After the speech, the Pope embarked on a speaking tour of what is now basically France and probably Belgium as well. He went round many of the small towns and cities of the countryside, convincing the peasantry to join the army and go and fight for the religious freedom of Middle Eastern Christians. Given that the crusade in actuality, or it didn't end until 1099, but it didn't actually start until 1096, 1097, there must have been events in between this speaking tour and the crusade proper. We must now talk about Peter the Hermit and the People's Crusade. Peter the Hermit was some boy. The original request from Alexios was for some knights, and what he was meaning was your standard, stereotypical Western European medieval knights. Whatever you think of as medieval knights is what Alexios was requesting. He was not looking for thousands of uneducated peasants from the countryside to descend upon the Balkans, led by a kind of nutter Peter the Hermit, who would eventually arrive in Constantinople just to be sent onwards. Like, he clearly wasn't aware of the existence of Peter the Hermit. Now, Peter the Hermit was a priest/preacher born in Amiens, or probably butchering that, so if there's any French people listening, then leave. No. If there's any French people listening, tell me how to pronounce that. Amiens in France around 1050 AD. From the sources we have, he seems to have been given the gift of the gab, and he convinced many peasants to join up his own unofficial crusade, which they would go kind of alongside or before the actual knights to assist them in recapturing the Holy Land. But these people, once again, were the stereotypical medieval peasantry that you're thinking of. They were kind of shoddy and unprepared and untrained in comparison to the knights that Alexios had wanted to come. There was also another, just to sidetrack, there was also another quote-unquote People's Crusade in the Rhine River region, which eventually led to a lot of dead Jews, as the German peasantry ended up just pillaging the towns in the name of "at the real Jesus Christ," who is verified on Twitter. But yeah, the less said about that the better, because it's quite grim. But back to Peter the Hermit. When they arrived at Constantinople in the early summer of 1096, Alexius Komnenos was basically and understandably like, wait, what the hell is this? I didn't ask for these illiterate idiots. I asked for the knights. But he did, however, eventually, and kind of a few months down the line, give them naval passage to Anatolia from Constantinople across the Hellespont or the Bosphorus or whatever you want to call it, and kind of just went, be free, roam the wilds. It's not my land anyway. But they ended up raiding Anatolian towns and cities, and they were eventually captured and massacred at one of these. Towards the end of 1096 into 1097, the proper Crusaders arrived. These were the trained knights he had asked for, and the sigh of relief let out by the Byzantines must have been audible from China. They were treated as honoured guests, and even though the Norman knight Bohemond of Tarento was Robert Guiscard's son, he took the oath of fealty required of him. Remember him, that guy that the Byzantines fought against in the heel of Italy and in Greece and in the Balkans around 15 years previously, the Norman guy, Robert Guiscard. So there was definitely it wasn't like a completely peaceful relationship that all these kingdoms and empires had with each other. But the kind of main guys in this army were the aforementioned Bohemond, Raymond IV of Toulouse, and Godfrey of Bouillon. And after some tactful negotiation of the political winds, Alexios managed to get most, if not all, of the Crusaders on side, although some came somewhat begrudgingly, and it may not actually last very long, which we'll see in the next video. So I think I'm going to leave it there today. It is a shorter video this time, however. We've kind of breezed through the events directly preceding it, and I think that the Crusade proper should be given the privilege of starting its own video. Not that it will be confined to the one video, because it obviously won't, it's too big a topic to be so, but it'll definitely be given the privilege of having its own video starting it. So thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, give it a like, give it a share. That's the most important thing you can do, in my opinion. Subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.